You can't beat swords when it comes to finesse, and some are really quite powerful. But they can't hold a candle to the raw destructive might of axes, especially an axe that stole a warpick's homework. That's serious business. So let's talk about the excellence that's only held back by one or two minor problems. Not so minor arguably, but they're almost perfect as melee weapons. By the way, if you notice the band-aid, you're not gonna guess what I cut myself on. If you make it to the end of the video, I'll tell you. The Igorot headhunting axe is really cheating. Let's get back to that later and focus on more conventional designs for now. You hold on to it real tight, buddy. If that falls over, I'm a goner. After what happened in 2018, I'm not sure he fully trusts me with it anyway. Alright, so axes are awesome in a lot of ways. They have superior leverage, hit way harder than swords, they can hook and trap, they can be gripped and used in all kinds of different ways to maximize speed or power and reach. Oh, you think you're safe over there? Nope.
At reach.
Can be anywhere from social distancing to sharp boxing. There's some neat shenanigans too, like extending your reach mid-swing. If you start out like this and as you swing, that hand comes down, it's going to hit a whole lot closer than you would normally think, at the expense of being highly vulnerable to binding and deflection. If your hands are that low and your opponent manipulates the end of such a long lever, there's very little you can do, so best to avoid that. There's a lot you can do with the other end, like deflectional parries or shove. They're a great way to make someone carefully choose their words with just body language. They're quicker and easier to make and replace, and they don't make you flinch with every cut, like, oh, I'm sorry, did I hurt you? I'll be more gentle next time. An axe will chop straight into armor and be like, oh, tasty, can I have some more? And axes make you 35 to 40% cooler. Scientifically proven, double-blind, randomized trials and all. Alright, jokes aside, while axes have a lot going for them, there are also a few drawbacks that stand between them and melee weapon perfection. One is something that Matt Easton has covered in a video. I'm going to link that down below. There are a couple of things I want to add to that. So he pointed out the difficulty in using axes, which comes from having a lot less edge to work with. So because you don't have like an entire sword blade, depending on the specific axe, this is a pretty small area and not a whole lot of margin for error, if you will. If you misjudge the distance a little bit, or if the opponent moves in a way that he didn't account for, then you may just miss, or bonk them with the haft instead of hitting with the axe. When it comes to the shafting, there's one thing I want to add. So Matt pointed out that if you miss and hit with the haft, it's not a big deal. Like, you can hit yourself in the arm with a stick, and even though it hurts, it's okay. But I would argue that if there's added mass at the end of the haft, you know, like if I hit myself even just lightly with the haft of this axe, worse than just the stick. So still not anywhere near as bad as that, or as bad as being cut by a sword, but that can still be pretty substantial blunt impact, I would argue. I definitely agree with the points Matt made overall, but I would temper them a little bit in the sense that when you look at a sword blade, you may think, oh, this is a whole lot to work with. But when it comes to effective cuts, the area shrinks quite substantially. So depending on the sword blade, you might be able to cut with a tip. It's just not going to be that effective. It's, you know, better than missing for sure, so that still holds. But depending on what you're dealing with, for example, if the opponent is wearing a gambeson or some other kind of padding, or perhaps even just sturdy clothing or several layers of fabric, that may not be enough to get through. I also find blade types that are effective at tip cuts are often relatively short. Not always, but tends to be like that. And if it does, then it's not going to cause a very deep wound. Depending on the mass distribution and notes of percussion and all that technical stuff, a tip cut may be quite ineffective with a number of sword blades. And you don't want to cut too low either, because then the leverage is not in your favor. If I set up to cut our bony friend here perfectly with the sweet spot of this blade, let's say he moves forward, now I hit him like this, it's not going to be fun, obviously. He does not want this, but it's less effective than up here. I would argue the most effective part of the sword blade in this case is about this much. In case of a better cutting blade, it's more, I would say, from about here to there maybe. So a bit longer than from my thumb to my middle finger. And no, I'm not flipping you off. Which is the effective length of this Dane axe. Now again, if you hit lower on the sword blade, it'll still do something. The same way as if you hit lower on the axe, the haft will still do something. Also, an axe blade that's behind you can do very mean things. If you hit a bit higher on the sword blade, again, it may or may not do something, just less effectively. If you hit above there on the axe, and yeah, it's going to miss. So yes, I do agree that the sword gives you more real estate to work with and makes it easier to hit things. And something like this would require way more accuracy, of course. Or this, or for that matter, that one. Especially the spike, which is by far the most brutally devastating part of it. But that's pinpoint accuracy you need. I have to say, personally, when sparring, even with a relatively small axe head, I didn't find accuracy terribly difficult. Although there is an example where I was off and didn't hit with the edge. The thing is though, smashing the hand with the haft of the axe, while the extra weight is pulling on it, that wouldn't be fun without gauntlets. The other downside has to do with durability. Not the axe head. The axe head is way more durable than a sword blade. Even a battle axe with quite a thin blade is still going to hold up a lot better than the vast majority of swords. But of course, it's the haft. You know, this can be damaged. Sure, it's not as easy as Hollywood makes it out to be, where you go to block a strike and the sword goes right through and gets you anyway. It's not going to happen quite like that, but it's going to be damaged, no doubt about it. There are ways to avoid that. You can deny contact. Like, for example, if you're in a forward-facing guard and the opponent tries to cut the haft with the sword, you just dip under, you know, just like with a spear. You just let it go past, and then you're okay. Or if they do hit it, you just kind of roll with it, and minimize damage that way. But it's going to be damaged much more quickly than something made of metal, obviously. Sure, it's quick and easy to replace, especially if it's mounted like a tomahawk, meaning that the haft widens in this direction, so that's the friction fit. You can just tap the axe out, throw the broken haft away, slide the new haft into it, tap it on the ground a couple of times, and you're done, because you don't even have to cut a wedge and insert it and all that. This is super quick. But back in history, in the middle of a fight, that wouldn't do the axeman any good. The thing is gone for the moment, so you would have to draw a sidearm if you have it. Of course, sword blades can and did break too, but much less likely than a wooden haft. Of course, there are ways to solve that, but that introduces another weakness in the process. You can use a metal haft, be it all metal or say a long metal tang that runs through the haft, or you can have langets in there. There's a bunch of different ways. You can wrap the haft with an iron band, or there's a bunch of different ways to either make it of metal or reinforce it with metal. But of course, that comes at the expense of speed, because you're now going to make the whole thing heavier. That's another common argument against axes, that swords are more nimble, which is true generally. I mean, this Dane axe here is remarkably light for the size in particular. I mean, I can swing it with one hand. It's a bit awkward due to the sheer bulk, But with two hands, I mean, you can, at a moment's notice, you can do a quick parry or shove it in someone's face or just cut like from standstill very quickly. Something like a halberd, which is a form of axe, doesn't have durability issues and hits even harder and can do more things, but is much clunkier. Not that it's unwieldy as such, but you're not going to be anywhere near as quick as with either a sword or a lighter axe like this. If we're talking maces and warhammers, that sluggishness is more of a concern in my opinion, but with axes, not so much. That can be mitigated at the very least. So to me, speed isn't really that big of a deal. It may be a disadvantage, it may not be, depending on the kind of axe. Right, there's one more significant disadvantage I should mention. If the opponent gets a hold of the haft, it's a whole lot safer for them than a sword blade. Yes, there are some manuscripts that show grabbing the opponent's sword blade to control it and do shenanigans from there. And there is also mention of how to deal with that. If you twist it in someone's hand while they're holding onto it, that's not going to be a fun time. So even though it's possible, it's way more dangerous to try to hold on to a sword or even a knife blade. That's just about the worst. Whereas the haft, not as big of a deal. Hand protection. None to be found here. But of course, not every sword has a great deal of hand protection. Some have basically none. Most of history had swords that did little or nothing to protect your hand because, well, that's what shields are for. Which of course you can combine the axe with. What do you do when you want the reach and power of a two-handed weapon without compromising your defense? Armor. And of course, gauntlets like this are quite effective when combined, in this case, extremely anachronistically, but you can just imagine it's a later two-handed axe. That's particularly effective because you don't need as much manual dexterity for an axe as you do with a sword. With a sword, you have to worry about things like, oh, do you need to put a finger over the guard or like through a ring, or do you have to change your grip a bunch of times or whatever? Do you need to use a handshake grip or this and that and the other? Do you need to switch to thumb grip or... It's not an issue here. Like, yes, you do need some manual dexterity to switch grips if you want to strike more effectively from the other side and whatnot. But overall, this works perfectly well, and now your hands are safe. Now, personally, even considering these disadvantages, if you want to include speed as well, I would not want to face this thing. Sure, the idea is if they miss, it's going to be a bit slower than a sword to adjust and come back for an attack. In this case, not so much because you can come straight back with the worse end, right? It's kind of the montante effect. What I mean is, if someone keeps swinging a large two-handed sword in broad circles, yes, there's the right timing, while they're coming back around. During that time, you can theoretically move in and catch them, but you need to be really fast to manage before it comes back around. And it's really intimidating to rush in on that because you know that if you're just a little too slow, you're taking it, and that's going to be quite painful. Another thing to consider is that especially this kind of design concentrates force to such an obscene degree that it takes barely any effort. So what I mean is, if I want to emphasize speed, with this point, if I just go pop, it's going to hurt quite a bit. Or if I want to move in with a deflectional parry, it really doesn't take a whole lot. In fact, even if I want to maximize how much I have available for defense, as long as I'm close enough, that's all I need. Now in this case, it would be nice to have a spike on top because thrusts are the fastest thing you can do. They come out of nowhere, basically. But then again, if you shove this in someone's face, I wouldn't want that. Now, in a fantasy world, you could very well make the perfect weapon in the form of an axe. If you have a magic enchantment that makes it indestructible, the main disadvantages are gone, pretty much. So at that point, You could make the axe blade very broad with a nice extra long cutting edge while making it fairly thin, right? To tweak the weight so that it's nice and easy for you to wield, that you don't have to overreach or be sluggish or whatever. It's still, there's plenty to work with, but you don't risk messing up the edge, so you can make it as sharp as you want. And you don't have to worry about the half breaking. Voila. If you combine that with armor, especially heavy gauntlets, maybe even enchanted too, there you go. Unstoppable fighting machine of destruction. So, yeah, could be perfect, but not quite. It's more of a min-maxing sort of deal, if you will. Oh, right, I said I would tell you how I cut myself. I cut myself on this guy's rib cage while setting him up. Not joking. Humans are so flimsy. Anyway, hope you found this interesting and entertaining. Thanks for watching. Check out stuff in the description, especially, of course, my Patreon link if you want to help out. Makes a big difference. Highly appreciated. And take care. Stay safe. Beware of axes. And cards, too. You never know when a mofo gets real angry.